My name is Eddie Finton, and I serve as your Assistant City Manager. First off, thank you for joining on a Tuesday night. I know that we have busy lives and really appreciate your participation in tonight's meeting. The goal of tonight's town hall is to provide a general overview about the Community Choice Energy Program and the Orange County Power Authority to help you understand what is being considered by the City Council, to answer your questions and get your feedback. Everyone here tonight is in listen-only mode. At the bottom of your screen is a Q&A feature. This is where you are able to ask your questions and interact with city staff behind the scenes to get those questions answered. If you see a question already posted that you would like answered, please like the question by clicking the thumbs up button. The 20-minute question and answer period will follow the presentation. This is where questions from the Q&A feature will be asked to the panelists. This webinar is being live streamed on the city's Facebook page. It is also being recorded, and you can watch the recording on the city's website, YouTube channel, and BPTV channel 3. If at any point you're having technical difficulties, you can listen in by dialing 669-900-6833 with the meeting ID 999-2976-4867. You can also find this code in the email you received from the Zoom meeting information. At the end of the presentation, a short survey will pop up on your screen that will encourage you to fill out. We want your input. Then on March 9th, 1 week from tonight, the City Council will decide whether or not to remain as founding members of the OCPA. Tonight is about getting you the information you need in order to make an informed opinion and let the City Council know your level of interest in the program. By the end of this meeting, it is our sincere hope that you understand what Community Choice Energy means, what the Orange County Power Authority is, and what the City Council must decide at the March 9th council meeting. You may hear a lot of acronyms, so I want to explain 3 of them before we begin. Community Choice Aggregation, or CCA, Community Choice Energy, or CCE. CCA and CCE mean the same thing and should not be confused. You may hear us say CCA or CCE. Please know that we are referring to CCE and we'll try to use CCE throughout the presentation. And lastly, the Orange County Power Authority, or OCPA, is the agency the council must decide whether or not to stay in as a founding member, along with the city of Irvine, Fullerton, and Huntington Beach. To kick us off, I would like to introduce our city manager, Mr. Aaron France.
Thank you, Eddie. Good evening, everyone. I'm Aaron France, your Buena Park City Manager. Thank you again for joining us tonight to learn more about Community Choice Energy for Buena Park. At this time, I'd like to introduce our Buena Park City Council. Our City Council is actually listening to the webinar just like you are. They are interested in hearing your thoughts, your comments, and your opinions. Please welcome Mayor Connor Trout, Mayor Pro Tem Sonny Park, Councilmember Art Brown, Councilmember Susan Sawney, and Councilmember Dr. Elizabeth Swift. Your City Council appreciates and values the community's participation and feedback tonight. Before the presentation, I want to provide you with a little background. Late last year, the City Council expressed interest in the possibility of joining the Orange County Power Authority, along with the cities of Fullerton, Irvine, and Huntington Beach, in order to provide community choice energy to our residents and businesses. At a special meeting on December 15th, the City Council voted to join as a founding member of the Orange County Power Authority, with the option to opt out with no penalties prior to the April 1st, 2021 deadline. The City Council appointed Councilmember Sawney as our board member and Mayor Trout as our alternate board member to serve on the Orange County Power Authority Governing Board on behalf of the city. The City Council also directed staff to hire an outside consultant to return to the city with a report. The city actually retained the services of MRW and Associates to provide an independent analysis of OCPA's financial viability, and then to return to review the OCPA implementation plan, and finally to provide an analysis of the risks the city would face if it remained in the Orange County Power Authority. At the February 9th council meeting, City Council reviewed the independent analysis of the Orange County Power Authority and directed staff to host a town hall meeting to receive input from the community prior to making their final decision of whether or not to remain in OCPA on March the 9th. So tonight we have experts in the field of community choice energy to explain what the program is and how it affects the residents and businesses of Buena Park. From the Orange County Power Authority, we have Brian Probolski, who's the CEO of the Orange County Power Authority. We have Gary Saliba with EES Consulting, and we have Ryan Barron with Best Baskin Krieger, who serves as legal counsel for OCPA. We're also joined by Mark Fulmer of MRW and Associates. MRW has been working on community choice and energy issues since they began in 2002. MRW has prepared and critiqued numerous plans and provides rate forecasting and ongoing support to CCES throughout the state of California. At this time, I'm going to turn over this presentation to Mr. Mark Fulmer of MRW to give his presentation on his overview of the Orange County Power Authority. Mr. Fulmer.
There. Hey, good evening. Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, everyone. What I'm going to talk to you tonight about is a general overview of what community choice energy is and what it might mean for your city to pursue a CCE program with OCPA or elsewise. Next, please. So the first question is, what is this? Effectively, what it is creating a new entity that would be purchasing or generating electricity on behalf of the residences and businesses within the territory served by the CCE. So in the case of Orange County Power Authority, they listed the 4 communities that are members. So they would actually go out and purchase the power. Southern California Edison would remain the entity in charge of delivering the power. That is, they would maintain all the poles and wires to get the power from their sources to your homes and businesses. And then you, the customer, would be receiving this power from Edison. So you would be getting effectively 2 different entities providing part of the service. You would have Edison providing the delivery services and this new entity providing the actual power itself. Next, please. This has been going on for about 20 years now. It started after the power crisis that occurred in 2000 and 2001. If you remember, we had rolling blackouts then and various major problems. And the legislature created this as a way of communities to gain control over the power for themselves. The first CCE was formed in Marin County, which is up in the Bay Area, which began service 10 years ago in 2010. Since then, there's now a total of 23 CCEs in the state. Overall, they're expected to serve about 50,000 gigawatt hours, which means that that's a lot of power. For each of the 3 major utilities, you can see that they're serving significant fractions. Right now, 15% of the load of Southern California Edison is served by various CCEs. When Orange County Power Authority begins service next year, that fraction would be increasing to over 20%. For PG&E has the greatest amount, where it's nearly half of their total load is served by these community choice energy programs. In San Diego, it's very modest at the moment. However, yesterday, the San Diego Community Power began service to a limited number of customers. That agency will be serving the city of San Diego and 4 other San Diego regional cities, and will be serving eventually about half of San Diego Gas and Electric's load. Next, please. This map shows the geographic spread of communities that have chosen to instigate CCE programs. You can see it goes from almost the Oregon border and almost down to San Diego. If you look closely, you'll be able to see a dot representing the Orange County Power Authority as yellow, being in the point where they're planning but not yet serving. Next, please. So the big question that I think it's important for you and your decision makers to think about is, why would you want to pursue CCE? Next, please. There are a number of reasons and rationales that communities have for pursuing these programs. First of all, providing a greener power portfolio than what they would get if they remained with their utility. This has been a big motivator for a lot of the early CCEs who were in areas that had a very strong green ethic and were eager to get lower carbon emissions from their power than they would have been gotten otherwise. Lower rates is another rationale. Effectively, when the program was formed in 2000, that was effectively what was envisioned. It was something that would provide better rates for their customers. CCEs can also offer good programs for their residences and businesses. We'll be talking a little bit more about those later, but such as supporting electric vehicles, incentives for solar roofs and the likes. So they can do things more targeted than the host utility can do, in this case, Southern California Edison. By doing all of the above, you can create local economic development. So that's important to some of you who are community organizers and the likes. Can these programs be used to create jobs and create economic benefit for the whole region? And lastly, the big issue, which is really overarching, is local control. The CCEs are organized in smaller geographic areas. So in the case that we're talking about tonight, Orange County Power Authority, it's strictly communities within the county. Sometimes it's a smaller region, if it's a smaller county, or even just a city. But the notion is, because the decision makers are in your community, they are your city council members, as was introduced earlier. You have greater access to them, and they have greater accountability to you, rather than Southern California Edison, which is one of the largest utilities in the country, let alone the Public Utility Commission, which is overseeing the whole state. Next, please. So these are all good things, but you have to have realistic expectations on what can actually be delivered. I found, unfortunately, a number of places having a little bit too much enthusiasm going into it, and then having to dampen that down to face the realities of particularly a new CCE starting up. So yes, you can have greener power portfolio. And in fact, CCEs have installed something like 5,000 new megawatts of renewable power in the state in the last 5 years, which is the vast majority of all the new renewables have come from CCEs. However, the state is also being very aggressive in driving down greenhouse gas emissions and having a whole statewide shift to greener power. So what the CCEs are doing is getting ahead of that curve, but we're all, the whole state, aiming for the same targets. Next, please. Lower rates, yes, but you have to realize that this isn't going to be a 30 or 40% rate savings here. It'll be a few percent. And that's not insignificant, but again, I have seen cases where they were overpromised and or misinterpreted, and that that disappointment occurred. Also, as I'll talk a little bit about later, the amount of savings can change from year to year, but it's not going to be in the 10, 15, 20% range. Next, please. Yes, you can offer programs that are very helpful for the residences and businesses, but that's not something that can be done quite right at startup. It takes time to develop these programs and get the CCE on firm financial footing before it starts branching out into these other activities. It requires time and money and expertise to do that. So they can be done, and it's being done aggressively elsewhere, but you have to be patient to allow the CCE to get their footing before those things can occur. Next, please. Local economic development. Yes, I've worked with some firms that do specialize in assessing the impact of programs on economic development and jobs. And yes, the CCEs do generate local economic dollars. They get more dollars in the economy. They can provide employment opportunities. However, this shouldn't be seen as primarily an economic development tool. It's a nice piece that can provide some good services to the community, but if you're looking at something for purely economic development reasons, there's probably better things to look at. And then lastly, the local control. Yeah, thank you. You read my mind on the slide. So yes, you have local control and local access, but it also comes with responsibility and accountability. These are $100 million plus a year programs, and so they requires a fair amount of expertise and sound management to get them to be able to deliver on those benefits that we've been talking about. Next, please. Just some general frequently asked questions that I've run across that I think might be helpful to review. Next, please. So how are they run and regulated? Overall, the CCE has a board of directors. For instance, for Orange County Power Authority, that board of directors has one member from each of the member cities. And as they add more cities, each new city would also gain a seat on that board of directors. For a city-only program, which there are a few in the state that aren't part of a joint powers authority, for them, the city council serves as that board of directors. Now, this board has control over a number of critical things. How it sets its rates and tariffs, that's very different than the utilities such as Southern California Edison, where they require approval by the state for all of the rates that they set. The CCE board has full control over those rates. It can decide how and what type of power to procure. And again, that goes to being able to offer power that has higher renewable content, has lower greenhouse gas emissions, or whatever the particular CCE is interested in. The board can craft that, again, within the state regulations and the state requirements to reflect what the community wants. And then lastly, they would have control over what type of programs and services beyond this basic provision of power that the CCE would be providing. Now, the state still has a role here, even though the state and the Utilities Commission isn't regulating what the prices are or how much the CCE can charge. There's still a number of requirements that the CCE must follow. Generally, there are mandates on how much renewable content anyone who's selling power has to achieve. There's mandates on reliability, making sure that each person or each entity that's providing retail electricity services meets certain reliability requirements and the likes. So that is actually a bit of a complex issue that has to be followed. So the CCE has a lot of flexibility, but still has some rather large guardrails that it has to remain within. Lastly, Southern California Edison is still very much in the picture. Edison will be maintaining all the power delivery infrastructure. So if you have an outage or you have problems at your home with the electricity, they're the ones that you would contact, and they would still be providing those same services. They also provide the metering and billing. So they still read the meters, and when you get a bill, that bill will still be coming from Southern California Edison. And if you look closely at those bills, you'll be able to see the charge broken out, and they'll have a section that says, this is what you have, your charges for Southern California Edison for their delivering the power. And here's what you're paying the CCE for the actual power itself. And then again, circling back, they're required to provide equal service no matter who you're getting your power from. Next, please. So how exactly do the CCEs offer a rate savings? And this is a simple figure that shows some important things. First of all, if we start at the bottom, we can see that blue segment of each of those two bars represents the cost for transmitting and distributing the power. So that's what we would call the delivery charge. And it doesn't matter whether you're on Southern California Edison service or CCE service, those delivery charges are always the same. So you can see those blue bars are the same size. If one remains with Southern California Edison, you'd be paying that orange section too, which is the cost of Edison to generate power or to buy power. So that's the cost of their power contracts, their power plants and the likes, and that represents their cost to buy power. If we go over to the CCE bar, we can see the next segment up is the green bar, which is what the cost to the CCE is to procure power and provide whatever other services it chooses to provide. And then lastly, on top of that, there's a small gray piece that is labeled the PCIA, which is, for those of you who really care, the power charge indifference amount. And that's a mouthful, but what it means is the state requires Edison to protect the customers that can't join a CCE by making sure that making sure that those customers don't pay any more simply because their neighbor chose CCE. So it's a bit of a complicated calculation to come up with that, but it's a fee to make sure that no one's harmed by other communities charging CCE. So you can see that little segment at the top is the potential CCE rate savings. And that's when we talk about the 2 to 3 to 5% savings is possible. That's that little segment that we see there. Next, please. So this shows what most of the current CCE programs are offering for residential rate savings. So that's that tiny little segment at the top of the bars that we were just looking at. So a couple things to take away from this figure. First of all but 2 of the CCEs are right now offering some amount of rate savings or parity with the utilities. This is comparing just a basic vanilla residential rate with the CCE or their host utility. Note that I don't want you to be too concerned about those 2 that are offering that aren't offering lower rates right now. That's for 2 reasons. First of all, the 2 there, Marin Clean Energy and Sonoma Clean Power, both have a very strong green ethos. They have a high priority on local renewable contracts and power, which tend to be a little bit more expensive. However, also, these bars move a fair amount from year to year. Generally, utility rates they try to set them just once a year at the beginning, although they don't always do that. But right now, the margins, which is how much rate savings they can offer, are particularly tight. And that's due to the way the rates are being currently set right now. When I did this survey about 10 months ago, it looked very different. At that point, all the utilities, or excuse me, all the CCEs were indeed offering rate savings, including the two that are now negative. And most of them, or many of them, were offering rate savings above that 2%, which is the target amount for OCPA. So the takeaways I want you to remember are the savings are on the single digit percentiles, but also that they do change from year to year. So on average, the CCE is going to be offering rate savings. Even Sonoma and Marin, for the 10 years that they've been operating, the vast majority of the time, they've been offering rate savings, even though they're not at this particular moment. So you have to expect that to bounce around a little bit. However, with CCEs who have a particularly cost focused, I would not anticipate them going below just simple parity with their home utility. Next, please. So how big are they? This is with respect to the load that each of the CCEs serve. And a couple things to notice. First of all, going from the smallest to the largest, it's almost a factor of 100. So while there's definitely benefits on being big, there are some small ones out there that are making a go and being productive. Secondly, I've highlighted in green where OCPA will fit in, assuming that the current members remain in. And it would be one of the largest CCEs in the state, one of the top 4 there. When San Diego gets in, they might cut in front of it a little bit. But I know that OCPA is talking with other communities in the county about joining, and that could increase it. But the bottom line is it would be one of the largest ones and definitely have achieved economies of scale. If Buena Park chose to withdraw from OCPA because they wanted to do their own standalone CCE, it would be one of the smaller ones, but not unprecedentedly small, and could in theory be viable as a CCE on its own. Next, please. Some customer perspectives. That is, what does it look like from a user's point of view? Next, please. So the customer options to join or depart from OCPA or whatever the CCE is. I'm going to use that for now because that's really what we're talking about. So when the CCE starts up, there are they have to provide 4 notices to you that your service will be switched. 2 of those will be happen in the 60 days before the actual switchover occurs, and 2 will occur after. A frequent question is, now why am I automatically enrolled, and why don't I get a choice to just join them rather than being put in there and then being requested to withdraw if I want to? Well, that's because that's the way the state law was written. It was written as what they call an opt-out. That is, you're in until you choose affirmatively to leave the CCE. During that initial enrollment period, you can return to Southern California Edison with no charge. There'll be various methods to do that, either click at a website or email or the likes. So once you get the notices, you're then aware, okay, I'm going to be switched over. And if I don't want to be, and I want to remain on Southern California Edison, here's the action that I need to take. And great efforts are made to make that as straightforward as possible. So let's assume that you've remained with OCPA, and a year or two, for whatever reason, you say, nah, I think I'd like to get my service back with Southern California Edison. That is not a problem. Effectively, you then provide notice to Edison and OCPA. Again, that'll be a straightforward process. And at that point, you say, I want to leave. You'll remain with OCPA for another 6 months, and then be charged generally a very modest fee for just the processing of it. And then you'll be back on Southern California Edison. Now, once you're there, you have to stay there for 12 months. the rationale behind all that is they didn't want people bouncing back and forth between the two, every other month or so. It would get too complicated for everyone involved. So they put these speed bumps in to make sure that people who are moving from one provider to the other do so in a more methodical way. Next, please. I think an important thing that the CCEs offer is expanded customer choice. What I have here are the 3 options from the Clean Power Alliance that they offer to residential customers. And Clean Power Alliance is the large CCE that serves the Los Angeles County area that isn't served by like LADWP. So they offer 3 different levels, and they differ by the amount of renewable content and emissions-free content. So they have a very basic level that's effectively meeting what Southern California Edison does. So it's no greener than Edison. One that's a little bit greener than Edison in the middle, and then one where you pay a bit of a premium to have fully green power. OCPA, as I understand, is thinking about having a structure very similar to this, but of course, that's going to depend on what the board decides when they start their services. So again, as a customer, you're going to have effectively 4 choices. You can remain with Edison, or you could choose, one of these kind of options. Next, please. Some of the customer service programs, question is, can you still participate in ones that are being offered by Edison? And for the most part, yes. So there are various incentives or services that they provide to customers, and you as a CCE customer can still participate in those. If you have solar on your roof, you can still participate in CCE. There'd be a little bit of a few differences, and the CCE will have to get their program up and going. So there may be a little delay, but even with those with solar roofs and can still take CCE service. Effectively, for those of you with the solar on your roof, you know that at some points you're end up selling power to Southern California Edison. In this case, rather than selling it to Edison, you'd be selling it back to the CCE, who would typically have been offering better prices than their host utilities. CCEs can also offer other customized programs, and I've seen quite a bit of interesting, innovative programs. A big emphasis recently has been on electrification. They're interested in doing that to cut fossil fuel emissions. So providing better access or more charging stations for EVs, particularly in disadvantaged and low-income communities, providing incentives and assistance for retrofits and new homes so that they'll be either more efficient or purely electric and the likes. So there are a lot of programs out there offered by a lot of different CCEs, and it would be up to OCPA when they get to that phase to figure out what best meets the desires and needs of their member cities. Next, please. So we'll talk a little bit now specifically about the OCPA. For the most part, what I've been talking about so far is really general across a CCE, whether you're joining OCPA, forming a city only, or perhaps joining some other joint powers authority. Next, please. So the OCPA was formed not that long ago. I believe in November, it pulled itself together. This is a long road that Irvine has been going down, has been leading, and they had a strong desire to do a CCE program and really wanted to do it regionally and not on their own. Thus, they started inviting other communities, or at least feeling them out to see if there was some desire to join with them in forming this new agency for power. Right now, there are 4 cities there, and you have them noted there. The OCPA has been in discussions with many other Southern California and Orange County cities about membership. So I suspect that a few years from now, that'll probably be many more cities. The agreement is called a joint powers agreement, and it's a fairly standard kind of structure that occurs when multiple cities want to join together to do something. I reviewed their joint powers agreement, and it's pretty well consistent with the others. As you know, because this has been going on actively for 10 years, there's a lot of good templates to look at to get something that we know works. OCPA is governed by a board of directors. It has 1 director per city. With the one little, I put a little footnote out now. Irvine is going to start out with 2 directors rather than 1. And that is because the city of Irvine is providing all the financing for OCPA. And when their loans to the agency have been paid off, which they have a strict schedule of payoff of those loans, they'll revert back to having just a single director. Right now, they have an executive director, Brian. He's going to be, he's here on the Zoom call and will be able to answer questions. And I'm sure they're going to be adding more staff to get going. Again, they're going to be a big CCA, and they're going to need the expertise to run efficiently and well. And they're planning to start service beginning next year. They filed all the paperwork so far necessary to do that. Next, please. So we talked a little bit about the governance, but I'm going to step back a little bit more and talk a little bit more about that. Next, please. So as I've alluded to, there's sort of 2 ways that cities can go about CCE formation. And we've talked a lot about we've talked so far about the Joint Powers Authority model, where the cities join together with others to form this one agency, like the OCPA. The other option is what they call a city enterprise. And a number of other CCAs are formed along those lines. A number of them in Los Angeles County. Lancaster was the first one to form, but that's also a viable model. For a city enterprise, it's just like another major city department, like a water department. There's some financial separation from the city, but the city council still acts as the board for that agency and has ultimate control and authority. That, and they have the internal staff within the city that do the operations. The Joint Powers Authority is fully financially separate from the city. So the JPA agreement made clear in a number of places that any obligations that it has cannot be transferred to Buena Park or any of the other members. It has the shared governance where each member provides a board of director to jointly manage the whole agency. And it has its own management and staff that are employees of the JPA and not any of the individual cities. Effectively, what it comes down to from a individual city's perspective is the trade-off between control versus responsibility and liability. So with the city enterprise, you gain full control. The city calls all the shots as to what it wants to do with the fund, with the revenue, how it wants to set rates and the likes. But at the same time, it has the full responsibility for all of that. And potential liability if things go poorly. They would have to be providing all the startup dollars to get it going. With the Joint Powers Authority, each individual city has less control because you're one voice out of many, but it's much less administratively burdensome from the city's point of view. They aren't providing staff, and they aren't subject to any liability. Next, please. As I was also saying, we see cities going, using both of these models. So we've got a number of the cities On the left that are enterprises from Lancaster that I mentioned, Rancho Mirage, Prime is Pico Rivera. So quite a variety of different cities, although they tend to be smaller, versus the Joint Powers Authority, which OCPA will become one of them. These are the ones that are in Southern California, Edison's territory. PG&E looks similar, where you have a mix of both joint powers authorities and enterprises. So the bottom line is both models are viable. Next, please. So what are just getting down to it now, what are the benefits versus the risks of pursuing a CCE program? Next, please. So the benefits we've talked a lot about before already. It can potentially offer lower rates, although only a few percent. It can offer greener power that can help cities if they have climate action goals, or individual city residents or businesses who want to buy greener power. This provides a very easy avenue to do that. It can offer targeted programs that are very specific to the cities themselves, and rather than the rather generic ones that Southern California Edison offer, and they're rather generic simply because they're having to be applicable to a very large swath of the state. Potential economic development, jobs are created, expanding customer choice. Again, I wanted to emphasize that because I think that's a particularly interesting and important aspect, that you can choose who you want to get your power from and express your values through those purchases. And then local control and accountability. You know who's running it. The board meetings are local, and it's just easier to interact and hear your voice through a CCE versus the alternatives. Next, please. The benefits of joining OCPA now, and I guess I should really call this remaining with OCPA, simply because Buena Park is currently a member and has the option to leave. So we'll say the benefits of remaining with OCPA. This is by far the fastest path to providing CCE service. If Buena Park chose to withdraw, it would be at least another year, 2023 at the very earliest, before it could begin a program, either on its own or rejoining OCPA or something else. 23 at the earliest. So it's the fastest way to get there. From the city's point of view, it's advantageous because it has no financial obligations. Again, Irvine has chosen to provide the startup loans and to backstop the initial financing for OCPA, and that means Buena Park will not be on the hook for any dollars. And it's the simplest from the city's point of view. The city provides a board of director, and that's going to be a lot of work for whoever that is. But you don't have incremental city staff that have to be added. You don't have to add a bunch of new positions or the likes. So it's administratively the easiest way to go for CCE formation. Next, please. Of course, there's always trade-offs. And that you have to remember that, and that's not the thing to be afraid of, but that's something to be acknowledged. In general, the CCE's biggest concern is, will they be able to maintain rates that are competitive with their host utilities? Again, we saw a couple there that weren't quite making it right now. And the CCE makes commitments to their residences and businesses about what rates they can offer, and there's the risk of not being able to do that. And there's a number of reasons that can happen. The wholesale power market can go up and down. Edison's rates can go up and down in often strange and peculiar ways. The regulations and requirements that are being placed on CCEs are always changing, and all of these factors can join together to make it a challenge to maintain competitive prices. These can be addressed, though. They're effectively participating in buying and selling power. It's complicated, but it's well understood. There are firms and individuals that have great expertise on getting appropriate risk management procedures in place to make sure that that the CCE doesn't get into trouble. Again, you got to pay close attention to what's going on at the state with the regulatory and what requirements you're required to meet and the likes. And you have to be good at communicating to the residents and businesses as what's going on and what should be expected. Risks of CCE to Buena Park itself as a city. As we just talked about, if it joins OCPA, it's very little risk. There's no obligations. They don't have to pay into anything, nor do any liabilities fall back on the city. If the city forms an enterprise, then yes, the financial risk becomes a little bit more important. In particular, the city would be responsible for whatever funds are needed to get the CCE up and going, as well as provide loan guarantees to any lenders to that city-only CCE. Next, please. The risks of joining OCPA right or now, or shall I say, and remaining with OCPA. These are generic, and I don't want you to read too much into them. First of all, you have to reflect with the county in general and the cities that have joined so far. Do those reflect the same values and priorities that you have as Buena Park? I can't answer that question for you, but that's something to be considered. Some of the larger CCEs do have a fair amount of tension between cities that have different priorities. Number two, OCPA is starting up with service next year. And right now, as we were seeing with the rate savings, the markets are tight. And it's going to, you shouldn't expect it to be offering more than 2% savings, if not less, over the first few years, simply because that's just the way the current markets and regulations are. Our forecasting and our review suggests that those margins will open up so that they will be able to offer greater rate savings in the future, but it's a tight one right now. And lastly, to somewhat state the obvious, OCPA is a brand new entity. So you can't go back and look and say, okay, they've done a great job over the last 5 years, because they just haven't existed. And that's always a risk, signing on with something that's brand new. Next, please. I address this simply because it's in the news a lot. And I understand I've gotten asked by many of my clients, and understand that many of you are very interested in this also. So what happened in Texas was a combination of a number of things. First of all, they had the big deep freeze that lasted a long time. They do get cold in Texas. It's not all sunshine. You do have ice and snow in Dallas and the likes. But this was a long period, and it froze the gas wells, so they couldn't get the gas out of the ground well. The coal and natural gas power plants had outdoor facilities that were also not prepared for the weather, and they froze up and then shut down the plants. And some of the many big wind turbines also froze up. So the infrastructure was just not ready. Not yet. Infrastructure wasn't ready. The grid in Texas isn't connected to anybody else. And that's actually very important, because often other states can step in and lend a hand and provide power if they have power lines running between the states, which they didn't. And then lastly, Texas is very lightly regulated. So they had, the regulators in the state were aware that something like this might happen, but they were leaving it up to the individual actors to make decisions as to what to do to mitigate that or avoid that, rather than going in and telling them, thou shalt do this. That's very different in California in a number of ways. The state is very concerned about reliability and maintaining power. It's having its problems with the shutoffs associated with wildfires, but it's really a high priority. We get parts of the state get cold, but where the power generation is, do not see days on end where it never gets over freezing. So that wouldn't be happening. As well as California is connected to the full Western grid, which is every state from Arizona, New Mexico, up through Montana, and in fact into to Canada, and then across to Washington. It's all one big power grid. So if there is an isolated problem, we can import the power to help mitigate those kind of things. Okay, next and last is effectively questions, and I'm going to effectively turn the control over back to Aaron and Eddie for this segment, and allow myself and the representatives from OCPA to deal with any questions that have come up.
Thank you, Mr. Fulmore. Appreciate you taking the time to help us with this. I do have questions, and for the public, please use the Q&A function or feature down at the bottom of your webinar Zoom meeting to ask any questions that you have. And I will start with the first question, and I believe this one will be for representatives from OCPA. So Mr. Poblowski, I'm going to start with you. Where would these green sustainable energy sources be coming from? If you could answer that, please.
I'm going to bring Gary Saliba in from ES to talk about our supply.
Good. The primary source for the green energy will be within the state of California. And most of the CCAs appreciate buying local green energy. So we haven't issued an RFP for power supply yet for OCPA, but I'd be surprised if it didn't give a priority to local renewable resources right there in Orange County. If we don't get enough there, we'd stretch out to the east, probably over to Imperial County, up to Kern, San Bernardino, and possibly further north until we fulfill the renewable resources we need.
Yeah, Gary, and to the audience, I would just add that beginning this year, 65% of Orange County Power Authority's renewables will have to be under long-term contract of 10 years or more, and those are required to be in-state and certain out-of-state that meets sort of in-state PUC requirements.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions regarding the rates. So can you tell us, will rates change over time or with the market? And there's a lot of questions in relationship to what's going on in Texas. Can OCPA respond to that?
There we go. I was talking. I wasn't unmuted. Yes, of course, we can address that, and certainly rates will change over time, and will reflect the market. I think Mr. Fulmer spoke a lot about Texas, and there's very little correlation, or actually none, between the way the Texas market is run and California. So we're not exposed to the type of issues they have, and certainly Buena Park is not at risk of snowstorms. Hope that helps.
Thank you. The next question is there some way that we can compare the quality of service? And maybe you can talk about the timeline on when our residents and business leaders will be able to compare the different options between current SCE rates with OCPA.
Sure. Gary, Ryan, you want to jump in on the timeline?
The plan right now is to bring the commercial and industrial customers online in the spring of next year, and the residential customers next fall. With respect to reliability, there'll be no change. The reliability is typically a function of the poles and wires business, which Edison takes care of now and will take care under the CCA business model.
So just to follow up to that, SCE has experienced blackouts or brownouts. Will there be any random outages like there are today?
That's a $64,000 question, Eddie. Probably. The brownouts and blackouts are a function of poles and wires problems, and Edison will continue to have those as long as there's events, summer temperature events, and wildfires. So yeah, I think it won't be any better or any worse under the CCA model, but there will still be some of that going on.
Yeah, in fact,
There's-
Southern California Edison is under a lot of scrutiny right now. There's been hearings at the Public Utilities Commission. There's one upcoming. All of that's within their purview. You know, the CCAs are quite active in ensuring against, power outages and giving proper notice to their customers. But all that is within control of the utility because they operate the distribution and transmission.
Okay, this next question is, what type of guarantee do we have that SCE won't raise their rate for use of the transmission lines?
The rates for transmission are governed by various regulators. And in California, you have what they call a postage stamp rate, where everybody pays the same rate, and the rate has to go through vetting and scrutinization by interested parties, and then finally adjudicated by various agencies. So arbitrary increases in rates have not happened in the past and won't happen going forward.
But more directly to that, those rates are likely to go up over time as costs go up, equally for all users within the SC service territory. So that portion of the bill will remain the same regardless of who you receive your power from.
Okay, this next question has to do with solar, and we have a lot of questions coming from that. So how will this affect the household with solar panels? And will there be a time of use the way SCE has now?
Ryan, why don't you take this one?
Well, I mean, Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but the solar customers that are currently under Edison will be phased over into the CCA. Typically, the CCA takes those customers later on in the process while it establishes rates for the NEM customers. I also am aware and have been currently working on one as general counsel to San Diego as well. The CCAs are establishing feed-in tariff programs where customers can sort of bid into the CCA, get retail electricity rates as opposed to what they're getting from the incumbent, and then basically sell their energy to the CCA. Did I get that right, Gary?
Well done. And I think Mark Fulmer's already brought it up. The programs for net metered people will be the same under the CCA at worst. And typically the CCAs will make the benefits of solar greater once they're up and running.
That's right, Gary.
Okay, next question. What would the benefit be for someone who's already on solar?
Yeah. Again, the benefit might be that the buyback price might go up from what they're getting right now. So there could be an economic advantage to a CCA that's not available through Edison right now.
So OCPA's buyback might be higher than SCE's?
Yes.
Yeah, Edison's is set by the PUC, and under the new rules, they're only required to pay what's basically incremental cost, the marginal cost. I forget what that is. It's like 6 cents or something like that. Whereas CCAs are trying to push that up to what actual retail prices are, where you can get 15 credit. That varies. I defer to Mark and Gary on that, but that's what I've seen as the lawyer.
That's right. Yeah, the CCAs generally have, I think your number is right. Let's say it's 6 cents a kilowatt hour from Edison. The CCAs offer an additional penny a lot of times, maybe more than that, on any buyback.
So I think the bottom line answer is equal or greater. Mark, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's effectively right. Not only do they offer that what they call the buyback rate, which is the for the net power that you're providing back to the grid. The CCAs tend to have a better price for that than Edison, as well as other terms that tend to be better that will get a little too wonky too fast to go into. But the bottom line is you'd be no worse and likely better off with the CCE service if you have solar rather than remaining with the utility.
Okay, next question is, if I opt out and go back to SCE, will my rate plan stay? And if I have a legacy grandfathered plan, what happens to that?
Yeah. I think Mark Fulmer addressed that already. Mark, you want to carry on there?
Yeah, this is getting very much into the weeds here, but if you're on what they call a grandfathered rate, which is because you have an older solar project, you should be able to switch back and forth between Edison and the CCA without losing that grandfather status. I think it's mainly key to when your panels were installed and began service. So I can't say with that complete confidence, but I believe that you'd keep that status if you do go back and forth between the two service providers.
Eddie, do you think that question was related to solar or other just rates in general? I want to make sure we get the answer that they're looking for.
Yep, I believe it was just rates in general. If they were in a grandfathered plan, it doesn't specify solar, but the way I would interpret is if rates in general, if they're in some grandfathered plan and then they come off SCE to go to OCPA, but then decide to go back to SCE, would they lose that grandfathered status?
I don't know what grandfathered plan they would be in. If they're in some sort of assistance program, then certainly that would stick with the customer. Any of the other folks on here have an idea what other kind of grandfathered program there might be?
Yeah,
That's not solar.
I'm not thinking of anything that's particularly. I'm not. Nothing's coming to my mind. I hate to say. The grandfathering has generally been around what tariff you're on with solar, and that's can be important. So I think that's what they were probably referring to, I hope.
Yeah, all the other rates are fluid. It's not like a cell plan where you sign up and then you maintain your cellular rate. The SC rates change frequently. So sometimes 4 times in a year, and all the customers move along with those rates up or down.
And importantly, that would be set by SCE and their tariff and approved by the commission. That wouldn't be something, the Power Authority has control over.
Yeah, the attendee clarified they were talking about the time of use plan.
The time of use rates are effectively, you should be able to remain on if you're on a grandfathered time of use period for whatever reason, that shouldn't change by going to the CCA service. In general, the CCA will be offering effectively the same rate design as Edison. So the same TOU period that you're on with Edison, you'd be on with the CCA. You'd just be paying you'd be paying a little bit less or the same for that power. But the CCA won't be instituting different rate time of use periods or anything like that. So whatever you're on, you would remain on with the CCA.
I think it's also important in relation to this topic to note that there's a multi-month period of time with a lot of disclosures where customers will have access to the Power Authority and our call center to have these types of conversations for the for the very, very specific types of issues related to individual customers. So you won't be surprised. You'll have an opportunity to really discuss that and vet it if you have an issue that's particular to you over a multi-month period of time.
Okay, this next question, I believe, for OCPA, and I think I'm going to turn to our attorney, Mr. Barron, for this one. Can you talk a little bit about the stipend for elected officials on the board? So the question is it true that the stipend paid to elected officials on the board would be the highest stipend in the county? And then there's a follow-up question related to CalPERS and public pensions. If you could talk a little bit about those two questions?
Yeah, sure. The JPA agreement provides for a stipend for members of the board of directors. That's not uncommon. I can't say if it's the highest or not. I actually don't know. It is pegged to the Orange County Sanitation District, and which sort of provides transparency and a fixed stipend for board members, which is common to, JPAs here. As for CalPERS, it is fairly uncommon for any community choice energy JPA from Marin to LA to San Diego to be enrolled in CalPERS. I think most all of them are actually not enrolled in any sort of defined contribution program. What they more commonly have done is, and this is required by federal law, is implement a retirement program similar to a 401 program you'd see in the private sector, somewhere between like a 6 to 10% match. Certainly not your 2.5 at 55, whatever you see across cities. So it's more of a contribution program that looks similar to, almost identical to, a 401 or 457. There's a couple options there.
Eddie, I'd like to add a little color to those two questions as well. For sure, the stipend is not the highest in the county or the region. It's $200. There are a lot of agencies that are over $300, there is currently no retirement program for the staff of the Power Authority. At some point, we'll have to implement something along the lines of what Mr. Ryan was discussing. But it's important to note that we'll have a very small number of employees, maybe 8 or 10, 12, maybe in a few years, but not really larger than that. And that's versus maybe 3,000 employees in our member cities. So this will be a very, very small entity. Staffing shouldn't be a big number related to the work that we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Let me find the next question. I believe this was covered during the presentation, but I think it's important for the public to hear this answer again. So will there be opportunities to opt out or change plans down the road, or is this a lifetime decision?
Absolutely not. I'll start out here, but absolutely not a lifetime decision. There's that period up front in the sort of the 4 months around formation where you can make an initial decision, and then on an ongoing basis, customers could opt out if that's something that they want to do with that 6-month notice. And they could also move within plans within the program over time, either at the onset or as they experience the Power Authority and make those choices on a rolling basis. And they can also come back into the Power Authority if they chose to go back to Edison, but they have to wait a year, as Mr. Fulmer mentioned in his talk, and that just makes a lot of sense. It's a somewhat cumbersome process, not for the customer, but for the utility, and you don't want people jumping around every day.
All right, thank you. What will the effect be on taxes with implementing this new program?
No effect.
Yep. Can you talk a little bit about the City of Irvine's financing the beginning of this programming as far as providing the startup costs and the loan to the agency?
Sure. The city of Irvine invested about $250,000 on studies and consultants and formational activities. In addition to that, they provided $2.5 million of direct funding into the Orange County Power Authority to fund the startup activities and the work with the regulators and the consultants to get us to launch. In addition to that, they've executed a funding agreement which offers some cash collateral for the bank financing that'll be required to cover the spread between the power purchases and the power sales. There's a lag. We buy the power, and customers obviously use it, and then they get a bill and pay their bill, but we have to pay for the power before those bills are paid. So there's some bank financing that covers that spread, and Irvine's cash collateral will help get us the best rates for that bank financing. All of that is at no cost to the other member cities, and once Irvine expects to be paid back for their loan by 2027.
Thank you. The next question might be for MRW, but whoever knows this answer can certainly jump in. The question is, since SoCal Edison would have lower income from using a CCE, what would stop them from making up their lost income by raising rates?
Effectively, Edison is regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. That means that the Utilities Commission sets Edison's rates, and Edison must apply to have any type of rate change and justify any kind of rate change before that commission. So while their revenue will be going down because they aren't selling that procurement of the power, they would still be making up and covering all their costs of the services that they are providing and getting the appropriate level of corporate profit for that level of service. So I think the bottom line is they are admittedly neutral on this. It does not affect their the bottom line for their shareholders, so they don't have an incentive to try to game around this.
Okay, we really appreciate all of the questions that are coming through. So let me find another popular one before we run out of time. So here's one. While I appreciate all the consultants and an emphasis on objectivity, can you share some of the possible reasons for the enthusiasm? And I'll stop it there since it's a multi-question question. So again, back to some of the pros. If someone can take, what are the reasons that public, our residents and businesses should be excited about this program?
Sure, I'll start out on that. You know, I think overall it's important to note that OCPA wants to keep customers in the program, and this is voluntary to stay in. So we're very motivated to provide the best programs, the best rates, high quality service, and have a very lean administration, which is going to allow us to be agile and capable to execute on those goals. The benefits of the CCE were outlined multiple times in the presentation, and they involve competitive rates, the ability to have local control. Right now, your rate setting and the decision making for your power is coming from basically Sacramento, from folks that you don't know and you don't interact with and you don't really have access to, and it brings it down here. Right now, your council member Susan Sonny is on the board of the Power Authority. attends the board meetings. You probably run into her in the supermarket. You don't do that with the people that you work with now. So local control is really a big part of this. And the ability to drive that back into the community, into local programming and things that are that reflect the nature of the community itself, and an opportunity to get ahead of the state on some of the carbon-free initiatives, and offer folks a choice to have multiple programs within their billing structure. Those are the primary benefits. But I'll ask Gary or Ryan to jump in if you can augment that.
I think Brian nailed it. The economic development implications are good, and you have more jobs and local projects locally, less greenhouse gas, lower rates, local control. Those all look like good things to us.
Yeah, it really brings together a crosshatch of residents and businesses. Those that are interested in green, those that are interested in rate savings, local labor, employment, regional job development. There's a big cross section of folks that are really excited about it. And there's almost a piece for everybody.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. And this one back to OCPA. If the city participates in a green energy objective, are there grants from federal or state that our city can benefit from?
I don't know if anyone can address specific grants today, but certainly we'll be constantly on the march for grant opportunities for the city, for the Power Authority, and all of the work that we do. And having that local leadership here will allow us to do that in a more nimble manner than sitting back and hoping that it happens on our behalf by third parties.
Okay, thank you. And I think for our last question, this might be for you, Mr. Saliba. Given your experience with CCAs, could you share some of the successes in terms of increased credit ratings, customer programs, increased opportunities for rate savings for certain businesses or solar owners, increase in car charging infrastructure programs? Can you talk about the positive aspects of CCEs and giving specific examples from your experience?
Yes, the existing CCAs have especially the ones that have been around for 2 or 3 years past the startup, have come up with a myriad of good customer programs that far exceed anything available from Edison. They're funded locally, they're targeted locally. EV electrification has been a primary focus. Battery storage is something that the CCAs are doing a lot. You probably saw that the consortium of CCAs are currently bidding out 500 megawatts of long duration battery storage, which is huge. And those are things that we just didn't get before. And it's all becoming possible through the CCA business model.
You're muted, Eddie.
Sorry, technology. Thank you everyone for all of the questions that you've asked. Some of them we were able to get to, some of them we weren't. We will attempt to answer all of the questions and post them online. So now we invite the public to participate in a poll. So please take a moment to fill out your responses.
I just want to say thank you all again for joining us tonight, members of the public, our panelists. We appreciate you being here. If you're still filling out your survey, please continue to do so. The community's feedback and input on these topics are invaluable to us. The City Council will be making a decision at the March 9th council meeting at approximately 6:30 p.m. that night. We encourage the public to attend or watch that meeting. Just a reminder, you can watch this webinar again on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, our city website, as well as Buena Park Television, BPTV3. Thank you again for your participation and wish everyone a great night.